I wish this video existed 3 years ago. This is the ultimate guide to life after university. So if you're at university now, or maybe you've recently graduated a couple of years ago, you've probably been at some point in your life at that point where you're not really sure what you want to do after university. Unless maybe you're studying medicine, in which case you're probably going to fulfill the kind of doctor route. Or maybe you're not sure. Well, in this video, we're going to cover all of the different options in which you could do after university. So we're going to look at whether you want to get a grad job or some other job, whether you want to work within a startup, whether you want to start your own company, or whether you want to do some kind of further education. So for example, you want to do a master's or something like that. We're going to take a look at all of those different options, look at some pros, look at some cons, and I'm going to share my opinion of each option based on my experience at university and post-life after university, and the experience of some of my friends who have gone down all different routes from me. So let's get into it. Let's look at the option of doing a postgraduate first, so some kind of further education. The main benefit of doing some further education is it's probably more likely to make you an expert in a particular field, particularly if the bachelor's degree that you did beforehand was relevant to that master's. So for example, I did a bachelor's degree or BSc in management. If I was to do like an MBA in business, whether that was at King's College or I don't know, somewhere as fancy as Harvard, if I wanted to do that, that's obviously going to really help validate that I am an expert in business. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to start an amazing company or that I'm going to be that amazing at running a business, but it provides some kind of academic credibility towards that. So number one, it's going to make you an expert in that field. Number two, the main benefit that I think is actually the biggest benefit of doing some kind of further education or specific study is that it's really going to open your network to a specific group of people who are probably going to be super valuable to you. So if I wanted to do that MBA, and maybe it was in entrepreneurship, I'm probably going to meet a lot of really talented people who want to start their own startup or maybe have already started their own company. So if I knew I wanted to really work with lots of people like that, maybe find a co-founder, that is a really good opportunity to network with those people and also experts within the field who will probably come in for talks, discussions, workshops, all that kind of stuff. So a real big benefit there. And fundamentally, from a monetary point of view, there's some government data that suggests that 80% of people who do a postgraduate are in some form of higher skilled employment compared to lower skilled employment. Don't ask me the difference between the two, but that's what the government data suggests. And also that for people who did a postgraduate degree, they are more likely to earn approximately £7,000 a year more than people who just did an undergraduate degree. So based on the data alone, purely based on that, then it's going to be more profitable to do a master's or some form of postgraduate versus just doing an undergrad. Kind of massively depends upon the different area of expertise and the exact postgraduate though, I would say. However, if we look at some of the negative things about doing a postgrad, well, the main thing is that realistically, it's some kind of form of further education that's quite expensive. So whereas a normal undergraduate degree might cost in the region of £9,000 in the UK, or at least in England, you're looking at for a master's degree really in excess of £10,000 to £15,000 a year, if not more in some cases, depending upon how specialist the degree is and how much the university want to charge and whether you are in the UK or whether you are coming from outside of the UK. It massively depends, but masters are generally far more expensive compared to an undergrad. And there's also less support from a loans and a grant perspective if you're wanting to do a master's. And at the end of the day, with a postgrad or with a master's, you're going to have to work like super hard. Like for me, when I was doing my undergrad, because I was doing a lot of projects and startups and things whilst I was at university, I'd kind of be doing my degree work between like the hours of 10 PM and 3 AM. Whereas in reality, if I was to do that for a master's, I'm probably going to really struggle to actually be able to fit in a kind of running a company and doing a master's between 10 PM and 3 AM. So I would definitely not recommend that. and it's something where it's definitely going to require that commitment and that hard work. The key thing with a postgraduate that I think is that it really depends on what you want to do with your future. So for me, I decided that I didn't want to do a postgraduate, at least not now. And the main reason that I decided that is that I didn't necessarily feel like the extra studying or the extra course that I would do and that commitment for a year or possibly 2 years was worth the additional cost for me right now. I foresaw, and I think looking back, my experience is that it was worth me going into working for a company, working for a startup like I did, compared to doing a postgrad. And if you're interested in me talking more about my personal story, I can definitely do a video on that. But I think for me, the reason I didn't want to do a postgrad is I wanted to get cracking in business, get cracking in working for startups, working in tech. And I thought that would be more valuable experience for me at the time compared to doing some form of further education. Another reason why I also didn't want to do a postgrad is that for the kind of roles, jobs, companies that I wanted to work for, it wasn't really a requirement. So, starting your own company, you don't need a postgraduate degree to start your own company. And if you want to work for a startup, or maybe even many of the tech companies nowadays, you don't necessarily need a postgraduate degree to be able to work for one of those companies. It may help, but it's not necessarily a prerequisite. And even doing some form of university degree isn't even now so much of a prerequisite as it once was. So it really depends, in my mind, on the industry and the area in which you want to do some further education, the cost, and also the weighing up the commitment piece on, realistically, you're going to have to do a lot of hard work, you're going to have to dedicate some time, but if it's going to be something that is valuable for you in the future, 100% do a postgraduate degree. So the next option for life after university is looking at some form of employment, whether that is a grad scheme, whether that is just a grad job, whether it's just a normal job after university. So you've got a few different options here. You can either do a graduate scheme, which is designed for people who want to do generally about 2 or 3 years within a company and have some different rotations within a company. And it's specifically designed for graduates, people graduating from university. You can either do a graduate job. Graduate job is effectively just a job designed for graduates specifically, but not necessarily with any rotation. Or you could just do a job which is designed for anyone. The main benefit of doing the job route is you're going to start to become a little bit more independent, and you're going to be able to get more experience within the kind of companies or within the experience that you want to do. In my mind, I didn't want to do a grad scheme or a grad job because I didn't really want to work for a company that I felt I would need to work for 2 or 3 years, particularly if I wasn't super sure on what I wanted to do afterwards. So for example, for me, I decided that straight after university, I didn't want to do a EY or a enterprise rent-a-car 2-3 year grad scheme in management, which is what the university was steering us towards, because it wasn't really right for me. I wanted to do something that was a bit more creative, a bit more flexible, hence initially taking the startup route after uni. And obviously, getting that job, you're going to get a taste of the career life, you're going to get a taste of adult life, you're going to get a taste of the 9 to 5 life, if that is something that appeals to you, and working your way up the ladder within a corporate. So if you've, for example, I know a friend who works at Deloitte, and something that he's doing is trying to work his way up from an audit perspective and up to manager. If you want to pursue that route, a grad scheme is definitely a really, really good way to do that if you want to build up the leadership within a company, for sure. And if you are doing the grad scheme route, which I know many of my friends have done, it's going to bring you the mentorship, it's going to bring you the support, it's going to give you the rotation across all different parts of the business, it's going to bring you up a really good network in that company, and particularly with events and other networking evenings and things like that. It's going to meet lots of like-minded people within that company or within that specific industry. But obviously just make sure that if you're going into that grad scheme, you know that that's the kind of company or the kind of thing that you want to work for. Otherwise, it can feel a little bit like you get trapped by that company if that's not something you necessarily want to continue doing. So really the main downside of working in a grad job, grad scheme, or even just a normal job is the lack of flexibility that provides. So it kind of depends a little bit on the job, but with a grad job or grad scheme in particular, you kind of are committed to that company generally for 2 or 3 years. And that's not to say that if after 6 months you want to leave, in reality you could actually leave. It's more of the case that if you want to be doing something for 2 or 3 years within that company, you may as well pick something that you're interested in. So if you're wanting something that's a little bit more flexible within the kind of scope of getting some form of career or job, you could just look for a job aside from a grad scheme. However, I do know there is many really excellent graduate schemes where if you kind of know, for example, okay, I'm graduating, I've done a degree in business, and I want to do like the BT or HSBC grad scheme because I want to do a grad scheme in finance or banking. It is a really, really good first step after university, build experience, build a network, and have something structured especially for you and for all the other graduates part of that scheme. So if you're looking for something that is structured, that is kind of formalized and it's kind of planned out a little bit for you, then a grad job or a grad scheme is definitely the way to go. If you want a bit more flexibility, then look at a job, or what we're going to cover next, which would be working for some kind of startup. So the third option is working at a startup. And this is something that you probably won't necessarily hear about at most of the careers fairs that I've attended, at least. Most of the careers fairs at university were working for a big 4 company or working for a massive corporate and doing their kind of grad scheme. So things like the big 4 or like EY, Deloitte, all of those, or working for somewhere like BT or Sky or like the Next grad scheme or something like that. Nothing wrong with any of those, but for me, I wanted to do something that was more startup-y, a bit more flexible, kind of like really creative, and something where I could get involved in like 101 different things, and no 2 days were going to be the same. That was kind of my thought going in, and that was the startup route I took coming out of university. I think the main benefit of doing some kind of work specifically within a startup, so whether you graduate and do an internship, even after you've graduated from university, that's still totally okay. Doing them inside university, even better, but you can still do it after. It's going to be a really good way of just basically getting inside a company that is growing really, really fast. There's 1,001 things to do, and you can pretty much get involved within 100 different projects. It's going to be a lot more here, there, and everywhere. It's going to be less structured. It's going to be less rigid. And for me, that was something that was super, super appealing. And the speed in which stuff happens in a startup is just mad. Like 1 week you can be organizing an event, the next week you're trying to sort out an investment round, the next week you're trying to organize a social media campaign. Like lots of things happen and change really, really quickly. And that also kind of brings a little bit of flexibility, but also a bit of ambiguity too. So things move really, really quickly. Sometimes things are not necessarily like in a straight line, process is not necessarily sorted out, but that kind of gives you a little bit of flexibility to figure out what you are most interested in, lean in and help where you can. So for me, that was really attractive. I think generally the level of responsibility within a startup is fairly higher than if you were to do the same kind of role within a larger company. So if you, for example, were part of a 5-person team and you get hired as the marketing person within that team, well, you're going to be responsible for the entire marketing strategy, the social media strategy, the budgets, the events, the influencers. All of that is going to fall on your shoulders. Whereas if you were to do that within a corporate, well, you may be one cog of, say, 50 within the marketing team, and you may just work on Twitter, for example, as opposed to organizing the entire marketing strategy for the whole company. So yeah, I think working for a startup is a really good and kind of unknown option. And there's a few job roles where you can find some really cool startup roles, whether you want an internship role, whether you just want a role outside of university. So I would look on places like Escape the City, great website. I would look on Angel, which is a website where you can see all the different startups that have received angel investments. And I would look on workinstartups.com. And another really underrated place is Twitter. So a lot of roles, particularly in startups or fast growing companies, will post their roles on Twitter. So the CEO, the CMO, the marketing manager might just post the role on Twitter. So if you kind of follow people that you're interested in, look on their Twitter, chances are if they're hiring, they may say a thing like we're hiring, or they may post the role. And even if they haven't, DM them, send them a cold email, reach out to them. You never know if you would be perfect for that company and they don't even realize that they have a role or that they have a need for you yet. But if you can demonstrate your value, then 100% you'll be well on your way to getting into that company and doing a great application. So startups are great. You get the responsibility, you get the great team members who are going to be super motivated. However, working for a startup is going to be a bit stressful. And that may be because you're constantly worrying about runway, which is how quick of money is the startup going to run out. It could be stressful because you don't have as much resources, you don't have as much budget to do things. There's less structure in place, there's less processes in place. They may not kind of have a formalized roadmap of if you wanted to get promoted, what does that look like going from marketing exec to marketing manager to head of marketing. They may not have figured that out yet. But I think that ambiguity and flexibility for me was worth doing as opposed to not having that. So I think if you're someone who wants ultimate flexibility, wants to kind of have a bit of ambiguity and doesn't mind getting involved in 101 different things and everything changing, then I think a startup is a really, really good option after university, which isn't really talked about much as an option in careers fairs or with university kind of careers advisors. So definitely have a look at those websites I mentioned earlier and consider it as an option after university, because for me, it was one of the best things I did for sure. The last option is starting your own company. And this is probably, well, it is definitely the riskiest option of the lot. And this may only appeal for a certain number of people who are graduating, and it may appeal to you if you're watching this video, it may not, but I think it's definitely something to consider. I think, when you're at university, so many of us get involved with great projects, societies, starting non-profits, starting companies. And I think in my head, the saddest part about university is we feel like when we graduate, we kind of have to leave that all behind and we can't necessarily continue those projects. Why not? The way I see it is, if you've got something at university that maybe you started a platform, you built an app, you solved this problem, you built this Shopify store, whatever it is, what's the reason you couldn't necessarily continue to grow that post-university? You'll have more time to do so, and you'll have the desire to really kind of make it grow, because at the end of the day, that will be providing, your salary, your bread and butter. So I think it depends on what the company is like when you graduate, whether you can kind of continue to grow it. But I think it's an option that people overlook, and you could definitely do. Depends a little bit on your circumstances, and also maybe if you can live at home for a year or so while you're building up the startup. You may not want to necessarily do that if you've just moved out at university for 3 years, but I think starting your own company, and not even necessarily starting, but continuing the work you've done at university, is an option to consider. And the main benefit of running your own company or your own startup, or at least giving it a go, is that it really provides the kind of ultimate control for people who are looking for that. So if you did a grad scheme or a grad job, that's kind of a formal structure. If you were to do some sort of further education, that's going to be continuing studying in a similar way to an undergraduate degree. If you want to work for a startup, that's going to provide you with a lot more flexibility. However, you're still going to be working towards the startup's goals or ambitions. Doing your own company means you can work on exactly what you want, where you want, with who you want, and whatever you want. So at the end of the day, it's not necessarily for everyone, and probably most people watching this video, you'll be thinking, what? I could do that? And I think you can, but you kind of need to make sure that you can still provide some sort of money to kind of keep a roof over your head, basically. And it's kind of a privilege to be able to do that after university. But if you've got something successful going, I know someone who was building something at university, and then after university, he decided to keep it going. It was bringing in enough monthly revenue to be able to kind of scale that out. And so he did, and he's running it really successfully today and has a small team of people. So it can definitely be done. The main downside, or the main con of running your own company, is all the responsibility falls on you, right? The income may be less compared to if you're working in a big company. It may be a bit more stressful compared to if you're working for a big company or a startup. And you're generally going to have to just figure things out, right? You're going to have to figure out how to set up the company. You're going to have to figure out how to pay people. You're going to have to figure out setup costs. But I think the best benefit of starting something for yourself is that the learning experience that you have will probably be the greatest of all of the different options. However, obviously it's kind of on your time and your responsibility to start earning that money. So what I've seen people do successfully is, if you're wanting to run your own company and maybe you've got a bit of monthly income coming in from it now, from that side hustle, I would continue to build it out as a side hustle and then continue to follow down one of the grad jobs, startup, or like just general job route. Or you could do some further education if you wanted, to kind of build it up to a point where it could comfortably sustain you, and then get all the experience working for a company, working for a startup, and basically be getting paid to build all that experience and build that knowledge, and then use those transferable skills to help build your company on the side. Obviously make sure there's no conflict of interest and make sure that you're not working on the company's time, but that is generally a really good approach that I would say if you're growing a company from university or wanting to start something after university, build it up while you're working for a grad job or a startup. So that wraps up all of the different options. I would say if you are looking for something where you want the best flexibility and you want the ultimate control of what you want to do, look towards working for a startup, or maybe even starting your own company if you have something that's ready. If you're wanting something that is potentially going to pay a little bit better, at least initially, and is a bit more structured, is a bit more formalized, and kind of everything is kind of sorted and figured out for you, and you're happy with that kind of 1, 2, 3 year kind of trajectory or that path, and you want to kind of work within a larger company, then look towards the kind of grad job, grad scheme, job route, or even further education if that is something that would be valuable to you and your goals and where you want to go. Hopefully this video has been somewhat helpful at helping you figure out your career options. If it has, I would love if you would subscribe down below, and also let me know in the comments of any questions you've got. If you want to see that video about me and my career life after university and what I did, then also let me know that too. Otherwise, have an awesome day and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks.